The alarm sirens screamed across the crystal towers of New Zenthar, their piercing wails echoing through the once peaceful mining colony. Commander Veltar pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold metal of the command center window, watching the dark swarm of ships descend like a plague of insects from the blood-red sky. "How many more waves?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lieutenant Kesra checked her holographic display, her blue skin paling to an almost white shade. 17 more hive ships detected on long-range sensors, Commander. They will reach the outer defense ring in 6 hours. Veltar closed his large black eyes and felt the weight of 3 million lives pressing down on his shoulders. 3 million Zenthari civilians who had come to this world seeking a better life, mining the rare crystals that powered their technology. Now they were trapped like prey animals waiting for the slaughter. The Vorthak swarm had appeared 3 days ago without warning. Their black ships had poured out of hyperspace like a living nightmare, immediately attacking anything that moved. No attempts at communication had been answered. No surrender had been accepted. The Vorthak simply consumed everything in their path. "Send the evacuation signal to all civilian sectors," Veltar ordered. "How many transport ships do we have ready?" "Only 47, sir. That's enough for maybe 50,000 people." Veltar's heart sank. 47 ships for 3 million people. It was hopeless. The Zenthari were a peaceful species. They had never developed weapons like the warlike races of the galaxy. Their few defense ships were small patrol vessels designed to handle pirates and smugglers, not an invasion force. "Commander," called out Communications Officer Thelnara from across the room. "We're receiving responses to our distress signal." Veltar hurried to the communications station. 2 hours ago he had sent out a desperate call for help to every known species in the galaxy. The message was simple: help us, or watch 3 million innocent people die. "What are they saying?" he asked. Thelnara's expression was grim. "The Rigelian Empire offers to take refugees if we can get them to their space. The Arcturian Federation says they will send medical supplies. The Galactic Trade Union promises to rebuild our cities after the war." "After the war," Veltar repeated bitterly. "What about during the war? What about stopping the Vorthak?" "The Altarian Defense Force is sending 3 cruisers, but they won't arrive for 2 weeks. The Capellan military says they're too far away to help in time." Veltar slammed his fist on the console. 2 weeks. The Vorthak would finish consuming their world in 2 days. The other species of the galaxy were offering to clean up the mess afterward, but none would risk their own ships to actually fight. "Wait," Thelnara said, her voice rising with excitement. "There's one more response coming in. It's from a species I've never heard of. Put it on the main screen." The holographic display flickered to life, showing a transmission from deep space. The image was grainy and distorted, but Veltar could make out a figure in what looked like primitive metal armor. The being was tall and broad with pale skin and small eyes. Most unsettling were its teeth, which looked sharp and pointed like a predator's. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet," the creature said, in a rough growling voice. "We received your distress call. Reinforcements are en route to your position." Veltar felt a flicker of hope. "How many ships are you sending?" 37 vessels of various classes. We'll be there in 18 hours. 37 ships? Veltar's hope began to fade. The Vorthak had over 200 ships in their fleet. "Captain Morrison, I appreciate your offer, but I must warn you. The enemy has overwhelming numbers. Your ships will be destroyed." The human's face split into what Veltar would later learn was called a smile. It was not a pleasant expression. "Commander, you called for reinforcements. What you're getting is the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force. We specialize in impossible odds." "Marines?" Veltar had never heard the term before. "Soldiers, Commander. We're sending soldiers. Prepare landing zones for heavy equipment and personnel. We'll need coordinates for enemy positions and civilian evacuation routes." Veltar felt confused. Most galactic species fought their wars with automated drones and long-range weapons. The idea of sending actual living beings into combat was considered primitive and wasteful. "Captain Morrison, surely you don't intend to engage in ground combat?" The Vorthak are incredibly dangerous in close quarters. The human's smile grew wider, showing more of those sharp teeth. Commander, we're from a world called Earth. Everything on our planet is dangerous in close quarters. We're used to it. The transmission cut out, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Lieutenant Kesra was the first to speak. Sir, should we trust them? They claim to be sending only 37 ships against a Vorthak fleet. Either they're lying about their capabilities, or they're suicidal. Veltar stared at the empty screen, where the human's face had been. There had been something in those small eyes, something that reminded him of the apex predators from his homeworld's ancient past. Before the Zenthari had evolved beyond the need for violence, their ancestors had feared creatures that hunted in the dark. Open a channel to all defense stations, he ordered. Prepare landing zones in sectors 7, 12, and 15. Clear the civilian population from those areas. Sir, you can't be serious about trusting these humans, Kesra protested. Look, at our options, Lieutenant. We have 47 transport ships and 200,000 scared civilians. The Vorthak will be here in 6 hours. These humans are offering to help, and they're the only ones who seem willing to actually fight. Veltar turned back to the window, watching the Vorthak ships growing larger in the distance. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We're already facing total annihilation. Over the next several hours, the Zenthari prepared for the arrival of their mysterious allies. They cleared landing zones, set up supply depots, and tried to coordinate with the incoming human fleet. The communications were brief and to the point. The humans seemed more interested in enemy positions than in casualty reports or evacuation plans. Commander, Thelnara called out, the human fleet is dropping out of hyperspace now. Veltar rushed to the tactical display. 37 ships appeared on the screen, but they looked nothing like the sleek, elegant vessels of other galactic civilizations. These ships were blocky and angular, covered in what looked like armor plating and weapon systems. They moved with purpose, immediately forming attack formations. Are those warships? Kesra asked in amazement. All of them, Veltar realized. Every single ship in their fleet is built for combat. The lead ship, a massive vessel that dwarfed even the largest Vorthak hive ships, opened a communication channel. This is Captain Morrison. We're beginning immediate deployment. Keep your people clear of the landing zones. Captain, what's your plan of attack? Veltar asked. Simple, Commander. We're going to drop down there and kill everything that's trying to kill you. Standard operating procedure. Veltar felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way the human said, kill everything, that suggested this was not their first time dealing with hostile alien species. One more thing, Commander, Morrison added. You might want to warn your people about what they're going to see. My soldiers might look a little different from what you're used to. The human ships began launching smaller craft toward the planet's surface, hundreds of them, like metal raindrops falling from the sky. Veltar watched in fascination and growing concern as the landing craft disappeared into the atmosphere. Whatever these humans were, they were about to change the course of the war. Veltar just hoped his people would survive the experience. The first human landing craft touched down in Sector 7, with a thunderous crash that shook the crystal buildings for miles around. Commander Veltar watched from the command center as the craft's ramp lowered with a hiss of escaping atmosphere. What emerged from the smoke and steam made his blood freeze in his veins. The creatures that stepped out were giants. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall, towered over by bulky armor that made them look even more massive. Their faces were hidden behind dark visors, but Veltar could see their breathing created small clouds in the cool air. They moved with a predatory grace that reminded him of the hunting beasts from his homeworld's darkest legends. By the ancient stars, whispered Lieutenant Kesra. What are those things? Those are our reinforcements, Veltar replied, though his voice shook slightly. The humans spread out from their landing craft in perfect formation. They carried weapons that looked more like portable cannons than rifles. Their armor was scarred and dented, suggesting these soldiers had seen many battles before. Most disturbing of all was the way they moved, constantly scanning for threats, never relaxing even for a moment. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the communication system. Commander Veltar requesting immediate meeting with your command staff. We need battlefield intelligence before we engage the enemy. Of course, Captain. Please come to the command center. Negative. Too exposed. We'll meet at landing zone. 7. Bring your tactical officers. Veltar exchanged glances with his staff. The humans wanted them to leave the safety of their fortified command center and meet in the open. It went against every military protocol the Zenthari had ever learned. Sir, Kesra said quietly, this could be a trap. What if these humans are working with the Vorthak? Veltar considered this possibility. The humans certainly looked dangerous enough to be enemy agents, but something in Captain Morrison's voice suggested a different kind of danger, the kind that came from being a natural predator rather than a cunning deceiver. Prepare a transport, he ordered. We're going to meet our allies. The flight to landing zone 7 took only 10 minutes, but it gave Veltar a chance to see the human deployment from above. Hundreds of soldiers were already on the ground, setting up defensive positions with impossible speed. They worked like a machine, each person knowing exactly what to do without needing orders. What struck Veltar most was their complete lack of fear. The Vorthak ships were clearly visible on the horizon, growing larger by the hour, but the humans showed no signs of concern. Some of them were actually laughing and joking with each other as they prepared for battle. The Zenthari transport landed near the largest human craft. Captain Morrison was waiting for them, his helmet now removed to reveal a scarred face with small, predatory eyes. He was even more intimidating without the armor covering his features. Commander Veltar, Morrison said, extending his hand in what Veltar would later learn was called a handshake. The human's grip was crushing, like being squeezed by a mechanical vice. Captain Morrison, Veltar managed. We appreciate your assistance, but I must ask, what kind of world produces soldiers like yours? Morrison's face split into that unsettling smile again. Earth, Commander. It's what we call a Class 12 Deathworld. Everything there tries to kill you from the moment you're born. Deathworld? Lieutenant Kesra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Poisonous plants, venomous animals, extreme weather, natural disasters, diseases, and about 1 million other things that want to end your life every single day, explained a new voice. Veltar turned to see another human approaching. This one was smaller than Morrison but moved with the same deadly grace. Her armor was painted with symbols that looked like primitive war markings. This is Staff Sergeant Lisa Carter, Morrison said. She'll be briefing you on our capabilities and requirements. Carter activated a small device that projected a holographic image of Earth. Veltar stared in horror at what he saw. The planet was covered in violent storms, massive mountain ranges, deep oceans filled with monsters, and vast deserts that could kill an unprepared traveler in hours. This is your homeworld? Veltar asked in disbelief. Beautiful, isn't it? Carter said with obvious pride. Now let me tell you about the life forms we share it with. For the next hour, Veltar and his officers listened in growing horror as Carter described Earth's wildlife. Tigers that could crush a man's skull with one bite. Bears that weighed over 1/2 ton and could run faster than most vehicles. Snakes, whose venom could kill in minutes. Sharks that had remained unchanged for millions of years because they were already perfect killing machines. But surely your technology protects you from these creatures, Kesra said hopefully. Sometimes, Carter replied. But we also hunt them for sport. For sport? Veltar couldn't hide his shock. Hunting is one of our oldest traditions, Morrison explained. It keeps us sharp, teaches us to think like predators. Every human child learns to track, hunt, and kill before they learn to read. Veltar felt sick. These weren't civilized beings offering assistance. These were monsters pretending to be allies. Captain Morrison, with all due respect, your species sounds more dangerous than the Vorthak. The difference, Commander, is that we choose our prey carefully, Morrison said, his voice growing cold. The Vorthak consume everything. We only hunt things that threaten our pack. Pack? Family, friends, allies, people we've decided to protect. Morrison's expression softened, slightly. You called for help, Commander. That makes you part of our pack now. And nobody messes with our pack. Before Veltar could respond, alarms began blaring across the landing zone. A human soldier came running toward them, his movements quick and efficient despite the heavy armor. "Captain," the soldier reported, "Vorthak scouting force incoming. 20 ships, ETA 4 minutes. Morrison nodded calmly. "Standard patrol response, let them come." "Sir," Veltar said urgently, 20 Vorthak ships carry at least 200 warriors each. That's 4,000 enemies. You need to evacuate this position immediately." "Commander," Morrison said patiently, "we have 37 Marines at this landing zone. That's more than enough." 37 against 4,000? Kesra looked ready to faint. "Actually," Carter interjected, "those are pretty good odds for us." Veltar watched in amazement as the humans calmly prepared for battle. Instead of seeking cover or calling for reinforcements, they seemed almost excited. Several of them were checking their weapons with the same casual attitude the Zenthari used for routine maintenance. "You should get back to your ship," Morrison told Veltar. "This might get messy." "We can't leave you here to die," Veltar protested. "Commander," Morrison said with that predatory smile, "we're not the ones who are going to die." The Vorthak. Ships appeared on the horizon like a swarm of black insects. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons already charging for the attack. Veltar had seen Vorthak assaults before. They were methodical, overwhelming, and absolutely ruthless. But as the enemy ships drew closer, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't run. They didn't take defensive positions. Instead, they began to advance toward the enemy, their weapons raised and ready. "Take cover," Morrison shouted to the Zenthari, "and watch how Deathworlders fight." The first Vorthak ship opened fire, sending bolts of superheated plasma toward the human positions. Instead of diving for cover like any sane being would do, the humans rolled and dodged with inhuman agility. They moved like they had been born in a war zone. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Hayes led the first squad forward, his voice carrying across the battlefield as he shouted orders that sounded more like battle cries than military commands. The humans responded with roars of their own, sounds that made Veltar's primitive brain scream warnings about apex predators. "My God," Kesara whispered. "They're not running away. They're running toward the enemy." Veltar watched in stunned fascination as 37 human soldiers charged headlong into a force of 4,000 Vorthak warriors. It should have been suicide. It should have been the shortest battle in galactic history. Instead, it was about to become the Vorthak's first lesson in why nobody hunts the hunters from Earth. The first Vorthak ship touched down with a grinding crash, its hull splitting open like a rotten fruit. Hundreds of insect-like warriors poured out, their razor-sharp claws gleaming in the alien sunlight. They moved as one mind, perfectly coordinated, absolutely deadly. Commander Veltar had seen entire Zenthari colonies fall to forces half this size. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Hayes raised his weapon and let out a sound that made every Zenthari present step backward in fear. It was not a battle cry or a war shout. It was the hunting call of an apex predator that had found prey. The other humans responded with similar sounds, a chorus of primal roars that seemed to come from the darkest depths of their genetic memory. They charged forward, not as a military unit following orders, but as a pack of predators moving to kill. "This is madness," Lieutenant Kesara whispered, but she could not look away. The first human reached the Vorthak line, and something impossible happened. Instead of being overwhelmed by the insect warriors, the human began cutting through them like they were made of paper. His weapon fired continuously, each shot precisely placed to cause maximum damage. But more terrifying was what happened when his ammunition ran out. Hayes drew a knife that looked more like a small sword and began fighting hand-to-hand with creatures that had evolved specifically for close combat. The Vorthak were faster, had more limbs, and possessed natural weapons that could slice through metal. It should have been no contest. Instead, Hayes moved like liquid death. He ducked under slashing claws, rolled away from snapping mandibles, and struck back with a precision that spoke of years of training in the art of killing. Every movement was calculated to cause maximum damage while avoiding injury. "How is this possible?" Veltar asked, unable to believe what he was seeing. Captain Morrison, who had remained beside the Zenthari observers, watched the battle with calm satisfaction. "Commander, let me tell you about human children." "Children?" Veltar tore his gaze away from the battle for a moment. "When a human child is 7 years old, we start teaching them martial arts, fighting techniques that have been refined over thousands of years. By the time they're teenagers, most humans can kill with their bare hands. On the battlefield, Staff Sergeant Lisa Carter demonstrated this perfectly. Surrounded by 6 Vorthak warriors, she had no room to use her rifle. Instead, she dropped the weapon and began fighting with nothing but her armored fists. Each punch was delivered with scientific precision, targeting weak points in the Vorthak's exoskeleton. But that's not even the impressive part," Morrison continued. "You see, humans have something most species lost when they became civilized. We still have our killing instincts." Carter grabbed one Vorthak by its primary limb and used it as a weapon to beat the others. The insect warriors, for all their individual deadliness, had never encountered anything like this. They were programmed to fight other civilized species, who relied on technology and tactics. They had no response for creatures that fought like wild animals but with the intelligence of advanced beings. "This is how you fight?" Veltar asked, his voice filled with horror and fascination. "This is how we play," Morrison corrected. "You should see us when we're actually angry." More Vorthak ships were landing, disgorging thousands of warriors onto the landing zone. The humans should have been overwhelmed within minutes. Instead, they seemed to be enjoying themselves. Veltar could hear them calling out to each other, sharing jokes and making bets about who could kill the most enemies. Sergeant Danny Wright had somehow acquired a Vorthak claw weapon and was using it against its former owners. He moved through the enemy ranks like he was dancing, each step perfectly timed to avoid attacks while delivering his own. When a Vorthak managed to wound his arm, Wright looked down at the bleeding cut and actually laughed. "He's injured," Kessera pointed out. "Why is he laughing?" "Pain doesn't affect humans the same way it affects other species," Morrison explained. "We're used to it. Our world taught us that pain is just information, not something to be feared." Wright proved this point by fighting even more aggressively with his wounded arm. The injury seemed to have triggered something primal in him, a berserker rage that made him even more dangerous. He began taking risks that would have been suicidal for any other species, but somehow he made them work. "Are all humans like this?" Veltar asked. "Right? He's pretty average. You should meet our special forces." The tide of battle was turning, in a way that defied all military logic. 37 humans were not just holding their ground against 4,000 Vorthak warriors. They were winning. The insect creatures, bred for conquest and programmed for victory, were beginning to show something they had never displayed before: fear. Captain Amy Foster had been fighting continuously for over an hour when something changed in her behavior. She had been methodical and precise up to that point, but now she began moving faster, hitting harder, taking more risks. Her breathing changed, becoming deeper and more controlled. "What's happening to her?" Veltar asked, noting the change. "She's entering combat trance," Morrison said with obvious pride. "It's a state where humans access their full potential. Everything slows down, reactions become perfect, and the fear of death completely disappears." Foster was no longer fighting individual Vorthak warriors. She was fighting the entire swarm as if it were a single organism. She anticipated their movements, countered their tactics, and struck at their coordination. Single-handedly, she was disrupting the hive mind's ability to control its warriors. Other humans were entering similar states. Their movements became fluid and deadly, their attacks perfectly coordinated despite having no apparent communication. They fought as if they could read each other's minds, covering weaknesses and exploiting opportunities with supernatural timing. "This is not normal combat behavior," Kessera observed. "For most species, you're right," Morrison agreed. "But humans, evolved as pack hunters, we instinctively coordinate when hunting dangerous prey. It's genetic programming that goes back millions of years." The Vorthak were beginning to retreat. For the first time in their recorded history, they were pulling back from a battle they could not win. Their hive mind could not process what it was encountering. These creatures fought like nothing in its vast database of conquered species. "They're running," Veltar said in amazement. "They're smart," Morrison replied. "The Vorthak just learned something important about humans. We don't fight to win territory or resources. We fight because we enjoy it." The last of the Vorthak warriors were fleeing toward their ships, abandoning equipment and wounded in their haste to escape. The humans let them go, not out of mercy, but because they were satisfied with the entertainment the battle had provided. Hayes walked over to where the observers were standing, his armor covered in green Vorthak blood, his weapon still smoking, from continuous use. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "That was fun," he said, as if he had just finished playing a game rather than fighting for his life. "When do we get to do it again?" Veltar stared at the battlefield. The ground was covered with Vorthak bodies, but not a single human had been killed. Several were wounded, but they were treating their injuries as minor inconveniences rather than serious problems. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said slowly, "your people are not normal." Morrison's predatory smile returned. "Commander, normal species don't survive on Deathworlds. Normal species become extinct. We're what's left after 4 million years of everything, trying to kill us." In the distance, more Vorthak ships were visible on the horizon. The main invasion force was still coming, thousands of ships carrying hundreds of thousands of warriors. Any sane species would look at those numbers and surrender. The humans saw the approaching fleet and began checking their weapons again, preparing for round 2. They were not afraid. They were not worried. They were looking forward to it. The Vorthak main fleet arrived at dawn, blocking out the sun with their massive hive ships. Commander Veltar counted over 300 vessels, each one capable of carrying 10,000 warriors. 3 million Vorthak soldiers were about to descend on their world, and the humans seemed genuinely excited about it. "This is going to be interesting," Captain Morrison said, watching the enemy fleet through his binoculars. "We haven't had a real fight in almost 6 months." "A real fight?" Lieutenant Kesra asked in disbelief. "Yesterday you faced 4,000 enemies with 37 soldiers. What do you call that?" "Warm-up exercises," Staff Sergeant Lisa Carter replied, checking her weapon for the 3rd time that morning. "This is when things get fun." Veltar studied the human preparations with growing amazement. Instead of building defensive positions or calling for evacuation, they were spreading out across the colony in small groups. It looked more like they were setting up for a hunting expedition than preparing for war. "Captain Morrison, surely you have a plan beyond just fighting them directly?" Veltar asked hopefully. Morrison turned to him with that predatory smile. "Commander, let me tell you something about human military history. We've been fighting each other for over 10,000 years. Every war, every battle, every conflict has taught us new ways to kill efficiently." He activated a holographic display, showing images from Earth's past. Veltar watched in horror as scenes of human warfare played out before him. Massive battles involving millions of soldiers, weapons that could destroy entire cities, strategies that involved sacrificing thousands of lives to achieve victory. "This is what humans do to each other," Veltar whispered. "When we disagree about politics, religion, or resources, yes," Morrison confirmed. "We call it Tuesday." The display showed more recent conflicts. Humans fighting in frozen wastelands, burning deserts, dense jungles, and ruined cities. They adapted to every environment, used every available weapon, and never seemed to give up no matter how hopeless the situation became. "But why show me this?" Veltar asked. "Because you need to understand something important, Commander. The Vorthak are about to fight a species that considers war to be an art form. We don't just fight to survive. We fight to win, and we've had thousands of years to perfect our methods." Lieutenant Colonel Ben Hayes approached their position, his armor already marked with fresh battle scars from the morning patrol. "Captain, we've got movement in Sector 12. Looks like they're trying to flank around to the civilian shelters." Morrison's expression darkened. "How many?" "About 50,000, sir. They're moving fast. Take 2nd and 3rd platoons. Make sure none of them reach the civilians." "Sir, 50,000 enemies against 60 soldiers," Veltar protested. "That's impossible odds." Hayes looked at him with genuine confusion. Sir, those aren't impossible odds. That's just a target-rich environment. Veltar watched Hayes gather his soldiers and move toward the enemy force. The humans showed no fear, no hesitation, no doubt about their ability to succeed. They moved like they were going to a celebration rather than certain death. Commander, Morrison said quietly, there's something else you need to know about humans. We have a concept called protective rage. When someone threatens our friends or family, we don't just fight harder. We become something else entirely. Something else? Watch and you'll see. The first reports came in an hour later. Hayes's force had engaged the Vorthak flanking attack and were not just holding their ground, they were advancing. The enemy force that should have overwhelmed them in minutes was being systematically destroyed. How is this possible? Kesra asked, monitoring the tactical displays. Medic Ryan Torres, who was treating wounded humans between battles, looked up from his work. Ma'am, you have to understand something about human psychology. When we're fighting for ourselves, we're dangerous. When we're fighting to protect others, we become unstoppable. Torres returned to bandaging a soldier's arm. The wounded man was complaining that the injury would slow him down for the next battle. He wasn't asking to be evacuated. He was asking for stronger painkillers so he could keep fighting. This is normal behavior? Veltar asked Torres. Pretty much. Back on Earth, we have stories about parents who lifted cars off their children, soldiers who held off entire armies to protect their comrades, ordinary people who became heroes when their families were threatened. It's built into our nature. The main Vorthak assault began at noon. Wave after wave of landing craft descended from the massive hive ships, disgorging countless thousands of insect warriors. They came in perfect formation, coordinated by their hive mind, equipped with weapons designed to conquer worlds. The humans met them with tactics that seemed to come from their darkest nightmares. Sergeant Kyle Murphy had positioned himself in an abandoned building overlooking the main landing zone. He had somehow acquired a Zenthari mining laser and modified it into a weapon of incredible destruction. Each shot could punch through multiple Vorthak warriors, and he was firing with mechanical precision. Where did he learn to do that? Veltar asked. Humans are natural tool users, Morrison explained. Give us any piece of equipment and we'll figure out how to either fix it or weaponize it. Usually both. Murphy ran out of ammunition and disappeared into the building. Minutes later, explosions began rocking the structure. He had turned the entire building into a trap, using mining charges and construction equipment to create a death maze for any Vorthak who tried to follow him. Across the battlefield, similar scenes were playing out. Humans were using the environment itself as a weapon, turning the colony's infrastructure into elaborate killing fields. They fought with a creativity that the Vorthak hive mind could not predict or counter. This is not standard military doctrine, Kesra observed. Standard doctrine is for fights between civilized species, Morrison replied. This is extermination warfare. Colonel Patricia Newman was leading the central defense, and her tactics were unlike anything Veltar had ever seen. Instead of holding defensive lines, she was constantly moving her forces, striking at weak points in the Vorthak formation and disappearing before they could respond. She's treating this like a hunt, Veltar realized. Exactly. The Vorthak think like a hive mind. They expect their enemies to think the same way, with central command and coordinated responses. But humans are individual hunters who can work together when needed. We're unpredictable. Newman's soldiers were demonstrating this perfectly. They fought as individuals when the situation called for it, but could instantly coordinate when opportunities arose. The Vorthak were fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The battle raged for hours, but something strange was happening. Despite being outnumbered by hundreds to one, the humans were winning. Not just surviving, but actually pushing the Vorthak forces back. I don't understand, Veltar said. The numbers should make this impossible. Commander, you're thinking like a civilized being, Morrison explained. You assume that more enemies means a harder fight, but for humans, more enemies just means more targets. As if to prove his point, Captain Amy Foster came running past their position, chasing a group of retreating Vorthak warriors. She was laughing as she pursued them, clearly enjoying the hunt. "They're actually having fun," Kessera said in amazement. "War is what humans do best," Morrison said with obvious pride. "We've been practicing for our entire evolutionary history. The Vorthak are about to learn why every predator on Earth fears the hairless apes who conquered the food chain, with nothing but sharp sticks and attitude." In the distance, something unprecedented was happening. The Vorthak were retreating, not just pulling back to regroup, but actually fleeing the battlefield. Their hive mind had calculated that victory was impossible and was cutting its losses. But the humans weren't done with them yet. The Vorthak retreat should have been the end of the battle, but the humans had other plans. General Frank Stevens arrived with the main assault force just as the enemy began pulling back to their ships. His orders were simple and terrifying. "No, survivors," he announced over the communication channel. "We hunt them all." Commander Veltar watched in amazement as the human strategy became clear. They were not content to simply drive off the invaders. They intended to eliminate the entire Vorthak fleet to prevent them from attacking other worlds. "General Stevens, surely you don't mean to pursue them into space?" Veltar asked. Stevens turned to him with eyes that held no mercy. "Commander, the Vorthak made a mistake when they decided to threaten our friends. Now they get to learn why human ships are built like flying fortresses." The human fleet moved into attack formation with mechanical precision. Their ships, which had looked crude and primitive when they first arrived, now revealed their true nature. Every surface bristled with weapons. Every hull plate was designed for maximum protection. Every system was built for war. Captain Jake Morrison took command of the space battle from the flagship UES Titan. "All vessels, this is Morrison. We're going hunting. Target priority is the hive ships. Leave no vessel capable of hyperspace travel." The Vorthak fleet was massive, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Their ships were designed for overwhelming, weaker civilizations through sheer numbers. The human vessels were designed for exactly the opposite purpose, to fight impossible odds and win. "Look at how they move," Lieutenant Kessera said, watching the tactical display. "They're not maintaining formation. Humans don't fight like other species," Veltar realized. "They're pack hunters even in space." The human ships spread out in what looked like chaos, but was actually a carefully coordinated hunting pattern. Each vessel moved independently, striking at different targets while supporting the others. The Vorthak hive mind tried to respond to their attacks, but could not predict where the next strike would come from. The UES Titan rammed straight through the center of the enemy formation, its armored hull crushing smaller Vorthak vessels like insects. Its weapons fired continuously, each shot calculated to cause maximum damage to the enemy fleet structure. "They're insane," Kessera whispered. "They're effective," Veltar corrected. Other human ships were employing equally brutal tactics. The UES Reaper had somehow managed to board one of the massive hive ships and was fighting its way through the corridors toward the command center. The UES Hunter was using hit-and-run attacks, striking fast and hard before disappearing into the debris field. But the most devastating attack came from an unexpected source. Sergeant Danny Wright had volunteered for what the humans called a suicide mission. He piloted a small fighter craft loaded with explosives directly into the largest hive ship's main reactor. "Wright, you don't have to do this," Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Captain, it's been an honor serving with the best killers in the galaxy," Wright replied calmly. "See you in the next life." The explosion that followed lit up the entire system. The massive hive ship, which had seemed indestructible, broke apart in a chain reaction that destroyed 6 other vessels. Wright had taken out nearly 50,000 enemies with a single attack. "He died for people he barely knew," Veltar said, quietly. "That's what humans do," Morrison replied from the tactical channel. "We die for our friends." The battle in space raged for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The humans fought with a combination of tactical brilliance and suicidal courage that the Vorthak could not match. Ship after ship fell to their relentless assault. On the planet's surface, the remaining Vorthak forces were being systematically hunted down. Captain Amy Foster led search and destroy missions that cleared every building, every tunnel, every hiding place where the enemy might shelter. Foster to command. Her voice came over the radio. Sector 15 is clean. Moving to Sector 16. Foster, you've been fighting for 18 hours straight, Morrison pointed out. Maybe take a break. Sir, with respect, there are still enemies alive on this planet. I'll rest when they're all dead. This was the human way, Veltar realized. They did not fight until they were tired or until victory seemed certain. They fought until every threat was eliminated, no matter the cost to themselves. The final battle took place at the primary Vorthak hive ship, a massive vessel that served as the command center for the entire invasion. The Vorthak Queen, an ancient creature that had conquered hundreds of worlds, waited inside with her personal guard of elite warriors. Stevens led the assault personally, taking a team of volunteers into the heart of enemy territory. They fought through corridors designed to channel attackers into killing zones, past defenses that had stopped every other species that had tried to board the ship. General Stevens to all units. His voice was calm despite the sounds of battle in the background. We've reached the Queen's chamber, beginning final assault. What happened next would become legend among the spacefaring races. Stevens and his team faced the Vorthak Queen, a creature the size of a building with natural weapons that could slice through tank armor. She was protected by hundreds of elite guards and fighting in her own perfectly designed environment. The humans killed her in 20 minutes. How? Veltar asked when Stevens reported the Queen's death. Teamwork, Commander, and the fact that we've been hunting apex predators for our entire evolutionary history. She was big and scary, but she was still just prey. With their queen dead and their fleet destroyed, the remaining Vorthak forces surrendered. For the first time in their species' history, they had encountered an enemy they could not defeat. Their hive mind broadcast a message throughout Vorthak space, warning all other swarms to avoid the hunting pack species from the Deathworld. The aftermath of the battle was unlike anything the Zenthari had ever witnessed. The humans gathered, their dead with solemn ceremony, honoring soldiers who had given their lives for people they had just met. They treated their wounded with gentle care while showing no mercy to captured enemies. What do you want as payment for your help? Veltar asked Morrison as they stood among the ruins of the Vorthak invasion force. Morrison looked surprised by the question. Payment? Commander, you called for help. We helped. That's what friends do. But surely you want something. Territory, resources, trade agreements. All we want is your friendship, Commander. And maybe you could call us again if you run into any more interesting fights. Veltar stared at this human who had just saved 3 million lives and wanted nothing in return except friendship and the promise of future battles. Captain Morrison, what kind of species are you? Morrison smiled that predatory smile one last time. We're the monsters that other monsters are afraid of, Commander. But we're your monsters now. As the human fleet prepared to leave, Veltar updated the Zenthari database with a new entry. Under the classification for humanity, he wrote, Benevolent apex predators, extremely dangerous to enemies, extremely loyal to friends. Recommend immediate alliance. The word spread quickly through the galaxy. There was a new species on the cosmic stage, one that fought like demons but died for their friends. Some civilizations immediately sought alliance with these terrifying creatures from the Deathworld called Earth. Others began to pray they would never meet them as enemies. The humans, for their part, were already looking for their next fight. After all, the galaxy was a big place and there were always more monsters that needed hunting.